July 4th, 1850. They're deciding to celebrate the nation's birthday. They've been 2 years building the Washington Monument. It was about 40 feet high at the time. And they invited the President of the United States to come speak. His name was General Zachary Taylor. And Zach came and made his speech. 4th of July in Washington's hot. So after he all finished with the hot air of the politicians speaking, while they went back to the White House, he got a bowl of cold cherries, ate the cold cherries, got stomach cramps, and died. That was the end of the Taylor administration. And so whenever anybody dies abruptly like that, there's Elvis or Marilyn Monroe or John Kennedy, or, there's always some speculation. There's got to be a conspiracy somewhere. And so they thought, well, maybe he got poisoned. And not wishing to act too precipitously, they waited 140 years until 1990. They just said, well, let's go check and see if old Zach was poisoned. And so they went to the cemetery there in Louisville to dig him up. They said he was well preserved. He could identifiable. And they took him over to the University of Louisville. The newspaper said, President Taylor took his first car ride today. and they checked to see if old Zach had died, and the truth of the matter, he had not been poisoned. But here's the point of the story. We used to make a big deal out of the fact that everybody has different fingerprints. No two fingerprints are alike. But we find out it's a lot more than that. There are no two earlobes that are alike. There are no two irises alike. You can have a dinner. You've all seen the movies where they go up and they check the iris. No two irises are alike. More than a heart. When a heart starts to beat after a few hours, the signature of every heart is unique. No two hearts beat alike. Never have, never will. More than that, you can take a cell, a single incy little cell, and when you dissect that cell, the DNA imprint says that this cell belongs to Zachary Taylor. Nobody else before and nobody else ever since. God made that person unique in the history of all mankind. He knows who you are, and he's not abandoned you. He knows what you're going through. And you know what he does for a living? You ever wonder what the Lord does when he gets up in the morning? He doesn't drive a truck, doesn't build houses. Here's what it does. It's found in 2 Chronicles 16:9. It says this, for the eyes of the Lord go to and fro throughout the whole earth to show himself strong on behalf of them whose heart is turned toward him. That's what he does. And here we are watching Katie Couric and got iPods in our ears and all that. And he's just sitting there waiting for us to turn and look to him because that's what he does. He knows, he loves us, and he made us. So, number 2, Paul, one day, after Christ had died, it had been about 25 years, and he's back in Jerusalem. He'd been on 3 of his journeys, and he's in the synagogue there. Some folks from Ephesus showed up. He didn't go over real well in Ephesus, and they remembered him. And so they said, that's the guy that had those Gentiles. And so they get everybody all riled up, and they start chanting, and they start beating the pulp out of him. And so at that point, the Romans who were in charge of the place, they said there's a riot going on down at the synagogue, and so they all come roaring down there on their motorcycles, and they come in, and they grab Paul, and they put him in the handcuffs, but actually they're big chains, and they start to walk him back to the police station, and everybody's just gathering around, and they're yelling and throwing things at him. And when he's going up to the steps, he says to one of his guards, he says, do you mind if I talk to these people? And he spoke to him in Greek, and the guy's all taken aback. He said, I thought you were the Egyptian that set the city on flame a week ago. He said, no, I'm from Tarsus. He said, let me talk to him. I said, all right. So he's up on the platform there, and he puts his hands up, and everybody gets real quiet. And he begins to talk to him in Hebrew. And now none of the guards know what he's saying. And so everything's nice and quiet. Things going pretty good. Until finally, he says about how he's riding along, and this light comes to him. He says, why persecutest thou me? And everything's going great until he says the part about that God said, did you take this message not just to the Jews, but to the Gentiles? And when he says Gentiles, that crowd they erupted again. They start throwing stuff, and they're yelling and screaming, and they grab him. And of course, they don't know what got him all upset. So they take him in to protect him. They said to the tribune, what are we going to do? He said, well, make him happy, beat the tar out of him a little bit, and we'll let him go. And so they have this thing called a flagellum, where we get the term flagellate, because you've seen, those of you that saw the movie, The Passion, Paul had already been beat up 3 times with rods, 4 times with whips, but he'd never had the flagellum, because that'll flat kill you, and if it doesn't, it leaves you scarred for life. And so they're stretching him out, ready to do this, and he says to one of the guys, he says, are you allowed to do this to a Roman? I said, what? He said, I'm a Roman citizen. Ooh. Well, a Roman citizen is not to be humiliated, he's not to be bound, and he is not to be sentenced to anything without a trial. In America, we put in our Constitution that you get a trial for everybody because we believe in all citizenship, but for them it just went to those who
who were Romans. And so with that, the tribune comes running down because he is scared to death. What in the world have I done? He said, where did you get your citizenship? I was born a citizen. Now, how did he get that trump card that at that time, when his life was about to be taken from him, he could plop it out on the table? Well, it just so happens that about 200 years earlier, 171 BC, a fellow by the name of Antiochus, who was the military leader at the place, decided that he wanted to make the little seaport of Tarsus into a big city. In order to do that, you have to put people there. And back in those days, you don't vote. You just say, you're going, you're going, you're going. And so he took the Jews in Jerusalem, and he said, herd them up, and we're going to send them up to Tarsus. And so he did. They took those people. They took Paul's great-great-great-great-great-grandparents and shoved them up to Tarsus. Now, from their perspective, I'm sure that didn't seem very nice. They're going to a foreign country, dealing with different people, but that's where they had to go. And they made them citizens of Tarsus. But that didn't, what does that get you? Well, you remember about Julius Caesar, for whom July is mentioned. You remember what happened to Julius Caesar? He got stabbed in the Senate, which is one reason you don't ever want to go to the Senate, if you can avoid it. And so, and you remember who did it? One of them was Brutus. And so Brutus, you know, Brutus, that's not the guy that used to fight with Popeye. That was something else. Pluto. That was Pluto. That's right. This is Pluto. This is Brutus. And Brutus wanted to be emperor, and Caesar Augustus, whom we know won, and August is named for, they began to fight, and Brutus chose as his home territory Tarsus, the city of Tarsus. But those people were never for him, and they were kind of helping Caesar Augustus all along. And when he became emperor, as an act of gratitude, he said to all of the citizens of Tarsus, bang, you get Roman citizenship. So that 2 generations later, when Paul's life is on the stake, he could reach in his pocket and say, look what I got. I'm a citizen.